The silver veins had spread to her hands by the time she saw the gates of Blackthorn Castle rising from the snow. Seraphina Ashford had been walking for 3 days. Her horse had died on the first night, collapsing beneath her with a terrible scream that still echoed in her dreams when exhaustion allowed her to sleep. She had left the poor beast in the snow and continued on foot. One hand pressed to her swollen belly, the other clutching the heavy fur cloak she had stolen from an abandoned hunting lodge on the second day. It was the only thing keeping her alive. She was dying. She had known it since the moment Cassian spoke the words of rejection, since she felt the bond between them shatter like glass and begin to poison her from within. The healers in her village had tried everything. Herbs that made her vomit for hours, rituals that left her weaker than before, prayers to the moon goddess that went unanswered, no matter how desperately she begged. Before she fled, she had managed to send a single letter to her sister, scrawled in shaking hand, "I am going north, to the king. It is my only chance. Nothing could heal a rejection this severe except a new bond. And not just any bond. The damage was too deep, the poison too advanced. Only an alpha of tremendous power could hope to save her now, could burn away the sickness that was consuming her from within. There was only one such alpha in the kingdom. The gates loomed closer with every staggering step. Guards in black and silver stood watch, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They were looking at her now, she realized, looking at the pregnant woman crawling toward them through the snow, silver lines tracing patterns beneath her skin like frost on glass, like poison made visible. 20 feet from the gates, her legs gave out. She fell to her knees, then forward onto her hands. The cold bit through her worn gloves, numbing fingers that had already lost most of their feeling. Her belly hung heavy beneath her, the child within growing still as her own life force drained away. She had perhaps 2 days left. Maybe 3, if she was lucky. She had never been lucky. One hand reached toward the gates, trembling, desperate. The guards were speaking to each other now, voices raised in debate. She could not hear the words over the rushing in her ears, but she knew what they were saying. She bore no house colors, carried no papers. Could be anyone, anything. A spy, an assassin, a nobody dying in the snow. The gates began to open. A young guard named Tobias, barely more than a boy, slipped through the gap and ran toward her. His face was pale with shock as he took in the silver veins mapping her skin, the swollen curve of her pregnancy, the death that clung to her like a second shadow. She managed 5 words before darkness claimed her. "I need the Alpha King." She woke to warmth and the smell of healing herbs. For a moment she thought she had died. The afterlife, if the stories were true, was supposed to be a place of comfort and peace. This felt like comfort. This felt like peace. It felt like surrender after so long fighting, after so many days of putting one foot in front of the other through snow and wind and despair. Then the pain came rushing back, and she knew she was still alive. A woman's face appeared above her, lined and weathered, framed by iron gray hair pulled back in a practical braid. Brown eyes examined her with clinical efficiency, the gaze of someone who had seen too much death to be surprised by anything anymore. "You're awake. Good. I was beginning to wonder if we'd lost you already." "Where?" Seraphina's voice cracked, her throat raw from the cold and the screaming she did not remember. "Where am I?" "Blackthorn Castle, the healer's wing." The woman pressed a hand to Seraphina's forehead, frowning at whatever she felt. "My name is Morella. I've been keeping you alive for the past 6 hours, which has not been easy, I assure you. You were speaking in your fever, saying a name, over and over, Cassian Ravenscar." Memory flooded back. The gates, the snow, the words she had spoken before collapsing. The desperation that had driven her across 3 days of frozen wilderness with nothing but a dying horse and a stolen cloak. "The king!" she gasped. "I need to see the king." "I'm aware. You've said it several times in your fever." Morella's hands moved to Serafina's wrist, checking her pulse with practiced fingers. The king has been informed of your presence. Whether he chooses to see you is another matter entirely. He has to. He's the only one who can save— A contraction of pain cut off her words. Not labor, not yet, but a warning. The rejection sickness was accelerating, the silver poison spreading through her organs, reaching for her heart, and worse, reaching for her child. Save you and your child. Yes. Morella's expression softened slightly, the clinical detachment cracking to reveal compassion beneath. I've been a healer for 30 years. I've seen rejection sickness before, watched wolves die from it. I have never seen anyone fight as hard as you have to stay alive. 3 days through the snow, alone, pregnant, dying. Most would have given up after the first night. I'm not fighting for me. Serafina's hand found her belly, cradling the life within. I stopped caring about me months ago, but my child doesn't deserve to die for her father's cruelty. Her? I don't know. I hope. I dream of a little girl sometimes, with my grandmother's violet eyes and my mother's gentle spirit. The words hurt to speak, but she spoke them anyway. Cassian won't acknowledge her, says she can't be his, though she is. He rejected us both when he rejected me. Morella was silent for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a healer who had learned long ago that false hope was crueler than harsh truth. The rejection sickness has progressed further than I've ever seen in a living patient. The silver veining has spread to your major organs. Your heart is struggling. Your child's heartbeat is weakening by the hour. Without intervention, both you and your child will be dead within 3 days. Possibly 2. Then help me see the king. I can try, but you should understand what you're asking. Morella sat on the edge of the bed, her weathered hands folding over Serafina's cold ones. The only cure for rejection this advanced is a new bond, a full mating bond, not merely a political arrangement. And only an alpha of tremendous power could hope to overcome the damage already done. The king? Yes. But bonding isn't just a medical procedure. It would bind you together for eternity. Your souls would be linked, your lives intertwined. You would feel his emotions, his pain, his joy. He would feel yours. Rejection can sever such a bond, as you have learned, but only at terrible cost. Any other breaking requires death itself. Serafina thought of Cassian, of the bond she had chosen with hope and lost to cruelty, of binding herself to another alpha, another man who could hurt her, control her, destroy her. She had trusted once. She had believed once. And Cassian had used that trust to break her in ways she was still discovering. Then she thought of her child, the heartbeat growing weaker with every hour, the life she had made. The only good thing to come from 3 years of suffering. Send for him, she said. Please. Morella nodded and walked to a small desk, taking up quill and parchment. I will. But know this. King Alaric has not bonded since his first mate was murdered 12 years ago. He has turned down princesses and duchesses, alliances that would have strengthened his kingdom. He has built walls around his heart so high that no one has been able to breach them. Then perhaps he'll refuse? Perhaps. Morella dipped the quill in ink. Or perhaps the moon goddess sent you to his gates for a reason. Then I will die knowing I tried. Serafina's voice cracked. But I will not let my child die without fighting for her with everything I have left. The door opened less than an hour later. Serafina had been drifting in and out of consciousness, each waking moment a little weaker than the last. The silver veins on her hands seemed brighter now, pulsing faintly with each sluggish beat of her heart. She could feel death circling, patient and inevitable, waiting for her strength to finally give out. But when the heavy footsteps approached her bed, she forced her eyes open. The man who stood in the doorway was not what she had expected. She had heard stories of the immortal king, the Alpha who had survived 17 assassination attempts and 3 wars, who had ruled for 15 years without taking a new bond after his first was murdered. She had imagined someone hard and cold, carved from the same ice that covered his northern kingdom. A statue of a man, perfect and untouchable. The reality was different. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with hair the deep black of a raven's wing, streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes were pale gold, wolf-bright even in human form, catching the candlelight and holding it. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, stark against weathered skin, a reminder of violence survived. But it was the weight in those eyes that stopped her breath, the grief, old and deep, that he carried like armor against the world. He had lost someone, lost them badly, and he had never recovered. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and something passed between them that she could not name. "You're the king," she whispered. "Not a question." "I am." His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "And you are dying?" "Yes." "You came to my gates to ask me to save you?" "Yes." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping beside her bed. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He was not as old as she had expected, perhaps late 30s, though he carried himself like someone far older, like someone who had seen too much, survived too much, lost too much. "Why should I save you?" The question was brutal, direct, stripped of any kindness. "You are no one. You have no political value, no strategic importance. Saving you would mean bonding with you, binding my life to a stranger's for eternity. Give me one reason why I should take that risk." She should have been afraid. A week ago, she would have cowered from that tone, that intensity. Cassian had taught her to cower. Cassian had spent 3 years teaching her that she was worthless, nothing, that no one would ever want her, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention he deigned to give. But she was dying, and the dead have nothing left to fear. "Because you can," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Because no one else will." She paused, gathering her strength for words that cost her everything. "Because I believe there is still something in you that wants to." His gold eyes widened slightly. Through the haze of her illness, she saw something crack in his expression. A fissure in the ice. "You presume to know me?" "I presume nothing." Her hand moved to her belly, where her child's heartbeat was growing weaker by the hour. "I only know that I crawled through snow for 3 days to reach your gates because every story I ever heard about the immortal king said the same thing, that he was fair, that he was just, that he had not been kind in many years, but he was not capable of cruelty. And if the stories are wrong, then my child and I will die, and you will have to live with that." She held his gaze, violet meeting gold, the dying woman and the frozen king locked in a moment that could go either way. "Can you?" He did not answer. He turned and walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Mirella found her crying several minutes later, silent tears tracking silver paths down cheeks already mapped with poison. "He refused," Serafina whispered. "I failed. He went to summon his council." Mirella's voice was strange, caught between disbelief and wonder. "I have served this court for 30 years. I have never seen that expression on his face before." "What expression?" Mirella did not answer immediately. She busied herself adjusting blankets, checking vital signs, all the practical tasks of healing that filled the silence between heartbeats. Finally she spoke. "Hope," she said quietly. He looked like a man who had just remembered what hope felt like. The council chamber erupted into chaos at dawn. Serafina was not present for the debate. She drifted in and out of consciousness through those hours, the silver poison creeping ever closer to her heart. But Mirella told her later what had transpired. The king had announced his intention to bond with the dying woman in the healer's wing, and his 12 council lords had responded with everything from shock to outrage to cold political calculation. Lord Harwick, ancient and sharp-eyed, had demanded to know who she was. A commoner? A spy? An assassin sent to seduce the king? He argued that the woman should be interrogated, investigated, dissected like a specimen before any decision was made. His voice had been the loudest, his objections the most pointed. Lord Pemberton had taken a different approach, arguing about succession and political alliances. If the king was finally taking a bond, it should be to cement ties with a powerful house, not to save some unknown woman who might die anyway. There were princesses waiting, duchesses eager for the honor. Why throw away such an opportunity on a nobody? Lady Corwin, the only female council member, had silenced them all with a single question. What house rejected her so badly she nearly died? The answer had changed everything. The healer, Morella, had reported what the woman said in her fever, the name she kept repeating. Cassian Ravenscar. Lord Cassian Ravenscar of the Eastern Reaches. A powerful noble, heir to one of the great duchies, allied with 2 other major houses. A man who had been angling for more influence on the royal council for years. A man who had, according to the woman's fevered testimony, rejected his pregnant mate knowing it would kill her. Suddenly, the dying woman in the healer's wing became a political statement. A bond between the king and Cassian's rejected mate would be a direct challenge to Ravenscar power. A declaration that the crown did not tolerate such cruelty, that noble blood did not excuse noble crimes. Lord Harwick had maintained his opposition to the end, warning that this woman could be a Ravenscar plant, a trap designed to compromise the king. His objections were noted and overruled. No one suspected that his resistance masked something darker than political caution. The king's response had silenced them all. I am not bonding with her for political advantage. His voice had been ice and iron, brooking no argument. I am bonding with her because she will die if I do not. The politics are irrelevant. The alliances are irrelevant. A woman is dying and I can save her. That is the end of the discussion. The bonding happened that evening when Serafina's heart began to fail. She remembered fragments, torchlight flickering against stone walls. Morella's voice, urgent and afraid, saying, "We're losing her." The silver veins on her hands pulsing bright, then brighter, racing toward her chest. Her child's heartbeat faltering within her, then warmth. A presence beside her bed that burned like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Alaric's voice, low and rough, speaking words she could not understand, but felt in her bones. Ancient words, binding words. His hand closed over hers. Golden light flooded through her, searing away the silver poison, burning through veins that had been filling with death. She gasped, back arching, caught between agony and relief. The bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock, like 2 broken pieces finally finding each other. Through the haze of fever and healing, she felt him, his grief, old and deep. His fear, sharp and immediate. And beneath it all, a fierce determination that she would not die, that he would not lose someone else. She tried to speak, to thank him, but consciousness slipped away before the words could form. She dreamed of golden light holding back silver shadows, and when she woke, she was alive. Thessaly arrived 2 days later. Serafina woke to find her sister standing in the doorway, road-worn and wild-eyed, her normally elegant composure shattered beyond recognition. Thessaly was 4 years older, with darker blonde hair and the same violet blue eyes, her features sharper, her manner fiercer. She had always been the strong one, the protective one, the one who fought when Serafina could only endure. She had received Serafina's letter and ridden 3 horses to death in her desperate pursuit, following the northern road to Blackthorn Castle as her sister had written. The evidence of that journey was written across her face in exhaustion and fear. She crossed the room and gathered Serafina into her arms, careful of the pregnancy, shaking with sobs that had been held back for days. "I didn't know," Thessaly gasped. "He kept you so isolated. I didn't know you were pregnant. I didn't know he was hurting you. I didn't know—" "How could you?" "I didn't tell anyone." Serafina's voice was weak but steady. "I was ashamed. I thought it was my fault. He told me it was my fault, every time, and I believed him. Nothing he did was your fault. Nothing." Thessaly pulled back, gripping Serafina's shoulders with fierce intensity. "I've been investigating him for months, ever since you stopped answering my letters. I have evidence. Letters he wrote bragging about how he controlled you. Testimony from servants he dismissed when they tried to help you. The child is his, no matter what he claims. And what he did to you, the rejection, it was attempted murder. He knew it would kill you. He planned it. He wanted it to kill me." The words tasted like ash. He couldn't bear that I might want anyone else, couldn't bear that I might leave him, even though he treated me like property. If he couldn't have me completely, no one would have me at all. Thessaly's expression hardened into something dangerous, something that promised vengeance slow and terrible. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. I don't care." Serafina touched her belly, where the baby had begun to move again since the healing started, weak flutters that felt like hope. "I only care about surviving. About my child surviving. The king's bond can save you. It already has. He bonded with me 2 days ago while I was barely conscious. Morella says it saved my life." She looked at her sister with exhausted eyes. "I am bound to another alpha now. Another man who could hurt me, control me, destroy me like Cassian did." "Is he like Cassian?" Morella answered from the doorway. "No. He is nothing like Cassian." Both sisters turned to look at the healer. "I served Queen Helena," Morella continued quietly, "the king's first mate. I was there when she died. I watched what it did to him. He closed his heart afterward, built walls so high no one could reach him. He has been stone for 12 years, frozen in his grief, unable to move forward." "That doesn't sound comforting," Thessaly said, "but the man behind those walls is not cruel. He is not controlling. He is wounded." Morella held Serafina's gaze with quiet certainty. "And wounded things can heal, given the right care." Serafina thought of the king's gold eyes, the grief he carried like armor, the crack she had seen in his expression when she spoke of hope. She thought of the way he had listened to her, truly listened, as Cassian never had. "Then I will try," she said, "for my child's sake, if not my own." The first week of recovery was strange and disorienting. Serafina's strength returned rapidly with the bond in place. She could walk again, could eat, could feel her child moving healthy and strong inside her. The death that had clung to her like a shadow was gone, burned away by the golden light of the bond. But the bond itself was a constant presence. She could sense Alaric at all times, a warmth in the back of her mind that never quite faded. When he was near, the sensation intensified. When he was far, it dimmed but never disappeared. She caught glimpses of his emotions without meaning to. Wariness, fascination, and beneath it all, a grief so old and deep it took her breath away. He visited her each evening, duty wrapped in awkwardness, formality covering uncertainty. He asked about her health, her comfort, whether she needed anything. She thanked him for saving her. Neither knew what else to say. They were bonded but strangers, legally mated but emotionally distant. Connected by magic but separated by walls neither knew how to breach. One evening, Thessaly watched him leave and turned to Serafina with frustration written across her face. "He saved your life. The least he could do is speak to you like a person instead of a diplomatic incident. He's afraid." The words surprised Serafina as much as they surprised her sister, but the bond showed her things Alaric would never willingly reveal. He lost Helena violently, watched her die while he was helpless to save her. He's terrified of caring again because caring means risking that pain. That's not your problem to solve. No. Serafina looked toward the door where Alaric had disappeared. But perhaps it's an opportunity. For both of us. She would not wait for him to thaw. She would reach toward him, even if he pulled away. 10 days after her arrival, the morning audience was underway when the herald's announcement shattered everything. Lord Cassian Ravenscar arrived to reclaim his mate from unlawful seizure. Serafina went rigid in her chair. She had been present in the Great Hall for the first time since her arrival, seated beside the throne in a position that was still undefined. Now she wished she had stayed in her rooms. Cassian strode into the hall like he owned it, golden and gorgeous, playing the wounded noble to perfection. The rejection that nearly killed her had cost him nothing. The one who spoke the words of severance bore no physical burden, only the one who received them. It was one of the cruelest asymmetries of their kind. His green eyes found her immediately, and she saw the rage beneath his beautiful mask. The rage that had always been there, that she had learned to fear more than anything. The bond between her and Alaric hummed with her fear. He felt her terror spike, and with it came a flood of memories she could not contain. Cassian's face twisted with fury, his hand connecting with her cheek, his voice telling her she was worthless, nothing, that no one would ever want her. Alaric's hand tightened on the arm of his throne. "My mate was taken from me," Cassian declared to the assembled court. "Bonded to another without my consent. I demand her return." Some nobles murmured in sympathy. Serafina felt sick. Then the king rose, and the hall fell silent. "Lord Ravenscar." Alaric's voice was cold as northern ice. "You rejected your mate. You severed the bond knowing it would kill her. She came to my gates dying and I saved her life. What, precisely, are you reclaiming?" Cassian smiled, all wounded nobility. "A misunderstanding, Your Majesty. A private quarrel between mates that she chose to dramatize. I never intended her harm." "Then you will not object to testimony." Alaric gestured, and a side door opened. 3 figures entered. A gray-haired woman in servant's clothes, a young man with a healer's bag, and a middle-aged man whose fine clothes had seen better days. Serafina recognized them all. Martha, who had tended her rooms and been dismissed for bringing her extra food. Willem, the healer who had tried to treat her bruises and been sent away. Lord Ashworth, a minor noble who had witnessed Cassian strike her at a garden party and been threatened into silence. One by one, they testified. Martha described the sounds she heard through walls, the blood she cleaned from floors, the locks installed on Serafina's doors from the outside. Willem detailed the injuries he had treated. Broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, bruises in the shape of hands around her throat. Lord Ashworth, his voice shaking, recounted what he had seen and what Cassian had promised would happen to his family if he spoke. With each testimony, Cassian's mask slipped further. His smile grew brittle, his hands clenched at his sides. "Lies," he said, when the last witness finished. "Servants paid to slander me, a disgraced lord seeking revenge." "And the letters?" Thessaly stepped forward from the gallery, a bundle of parchment in her hands. "The letters you wrote to your brother, bragging about how you had broken her, how she was too afraid to even look at another man, how you had taught her exactly where she belonged." She held them up. "Your own handwriting, Lord Ravenscar. Your own words." Cassian's composure shattered. He turned on Serafina, forgetting the court, forgetting the witnesses, forgetting everything but his rage. "You were mine," he snarled. "Mine to discipline, mine to control. Everything I did because you needed to learn your place." He stopped. The silence in the hall was absolute. "Continue," Alaric said softly. "Tell us more about her place." But Cassian had finally realized what he had revealed. His face went white. Serafina stood. Her legs shook, but she stood. "I am not your property, Cassian." Her voice carried across the hall, steady when it should have shattered. "I never was. and I am not returning to you." Cassian's beautiful face twisted with fury. He invoked an ancient law, the right of a rejected mate to challenge the new bondholder for possession. Combat until submission or death. Lady Corwin's voice cut through the murmurs. "You invoke the law of rejected mates? You did the rejecting, Lord Ravenscar. That law protects those who were abandoned, not those who abandoned." Cassian smiled, cold and practiced. "The law speaks of rejection, my lady. It does not specify who spoke the words. The bond was severed. I am the aggrieved party." It was a twisted interpretation, and everyone knew it, but Alaric's response surprised them all. "Accepted." But Seraphina felt something through the bond, a flicker of fear, a flash of memory. Another challenge, another time. Helena dying not in combat but from assassins who took advantage of the chaos. She grabbed his arm before she could stop herself. "He wants you distracted," she said quietly. "He has a plan. This challenge is only the beginning." Alaric looked at her, truly looked. "You see that clearly? I feel it. Through you. Your instincts are screaming that something is wrong." Trust, new and fragile, flowed between them like warmth through clasped hands. "Very well, Lord Ravenscar. The challenge occurs in 3 days. Until then, you will enjoy my hospitality." Alaric smiled, and it was not kind. Under guard. The next 2 days, Thessaly became a spy. Seraphina's sister had always been the clever one, the one who watched and waited and planned. While Seraphina recovered her strength, Thessaly moved through the castle like a shadow, using her connections among the court ladies to gather whispers and rumors. Seraphina contributed what she could. In her years with Cassian, she had learned to be invisible, to fade into the background, to make herself small and unnoticed. She had thought those skills were marks of shame, evidence of how thoroughly he had broken her. Now she understood they could be weapons. She could not move freely. Her pregnancy and recent illness made that impossible. But she could watch. She could listen. And when nobles spoke near her, assuming the king's fragile bondmate was too insignificant to notice, she remembered every word. "Cassian has been meeting with someone on the council," she told Thessaly one evening. "I overheard Lord Pemberton mention it to his wife. Late-night meetings in the East Wing." Thessaly followed that thread. She befriended serving girls, traded gossip with laundresses, and mapped the movements of Cassian's retinue. What she discovered chilled them both. Cassian's 3 servants moved like trained killers. Their hands were too calloused for household work, their eyes too watchful, their positioning always tactical. These were not servants. These were assassins wearing servants' clothes. And the council member meeting with Cassian was Lord Harwick, the same lord who had opposed Seraphina's presence so loudly in council, whose objections had seemed merely political at the time. Mirella confirmed the worst when Thessaly brought her findings. Harwick had long been suspected as the traitor behind assassination attempts on the king. His family had lost power when Alaric's father took the throne, and he had been nursing that grievance for decades, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. If the challenge created enough chaos, if attention was focused on the combat, if the king was distracted by fighting for his bond. Seraphina brought everything to Alaric that night, in the privacy of his chambers. He listened in silence, and she felt his emotions cycle from disbelief to recognition to cold rage. The bond made his feelings as clear as if they were her own. "Harwick was my father's friend," he said finally. "I've suspected him for years but never had proof." "Now you have suspicion from a woman you barely know." She met his eyes. "Is that enough? It's not about evidence anymore." He moved to the window, looking out at the courtyard where the challenge would take place. "It's about the fact that you chose to warn me. You could have stayed silent. Let whatever happens, happen. You owe me nothing. You saved my life. You saved my child's life." She crossed the room to stand beside him. "I owe you everything. The bond saved you. I was merely the instrument." You were more than that. She took his hand. Her choice. Her reaching. You let me in. Even though you were terrified. That was brave. Or foolish. Perhaps both. She squeezed his hand gently. But I am glad you did. She sensed his walls beginning to crack, years of grief and isolation giving way to something fragile and new. We face this together then, he said. We face this together. The day of the challenge dawned cold and clear. Serafina had not slept. She had spent the night with Alaric's captain of the guard, learning the positions of their trusted soldiers, memorizing the faces of those they suspected might be compromised. She had hidden a knife in her sleeve, practicing until she could draw it smoothly despite her trembling hands. Thessaly had tried to convince her to stay in her rooms. You're pregnant, she had argued. Let others fight. Others have failed for years, Serafina had replied. Harwick has been scheming against the crown since before I was born, and no one has stopped him. I won't let him succeed now. Not when I finally have something worth protecting. The courtyard had been transformed into an arena. Banners snapped in the wind. The entire court gathered to witness what they believed would be simple combat between two alphas fighting for possession of a woman. They did not know about the conspiracy waiting to strike. They did not know about the assassins hidden among them. But Serafina knew. And she was ready. She sat in the observation gallery, surrounded by guards who watched not for threats to her, but for Harwick's assassins. Her hands were folded over her pregnant belly, the picture of feminine helplessness. No one noticed the tension in her shoulders, or the way her eyes tracked every movement in the crowd. Cassian entered first, golden and gleaming, playing to the audience with a smile that made her stomach turn. He looked up at her in the gallery and blew her a kiss, as if she were still his. As if she would ever go back to him willingly. Her stomach lurched. For one terrible heartbeat, she was back in his manor, small and afraid, and desperately trying not to provoke him. Her hands trembled. Her breath caught. Then Alaric's presence flickered through the bond. Steady, protective, there. And she straightened. She met his gaze without flinching. She had spent 3 years cowering from that smile. No more. Alaric entered second, dressed for combat rather than ceremony. Black leather and simple steel, practical and deadly. His gold eyes found hers across the courtyard, and she felt the echo of his heart. Determination, growing affection, and fear. Not for himself, but for her. She let her own feelings flow back to him. Faith. Trust. Certainty. The rules were recited. The blades were drawn. The herald stepped back. Combat began. Steel rang against steel, the sound echoing off the castle walls. Cassian fought with flashy aggression, every move designed to impress the watching crowd, to show his prowess, to demonstrate that he deserved to reclaim what had been taken from him. He was skilled, she had to admit. He had trained with the best swordsmen in the kingdom. But Alaric was the immortal king. He had survived 17 assassination attempts. He had led armies in 3 wars. He had buried a wife and kept fighting. Alaric fought with economical precision, wasting no motion, revealing nothing, watching Cassian with the patient eyes of a predator who knew that flashy aggression eventually exhausted itself. The bond carried every sensation to her, each blow, each near miss, each moment of danger. She felt his pain when Cassian's blade sliced his arm. She felt his focus never waver. She also saw the assassins moving through the gallery. She signaled the guards. One of them, Harwick's plant, they had learned, moved toward her instead of toward the assassins. Thessaly was faster. She had positioned herself behind the traitor guard, and when he reached for Serafina, Thessaly drove a knife into his sword arm. He screamed. The alarm was raised, chaos erupted. The assassins attacked, loyal guards engaged them. Serafina was pulled back by 2 soldiers sworn to protect her, but she saw everything. The flash of blades, the spray of blood, the assassins falling one by one to guards who had been warned and were ready. In the arena, Cassian saw his plan crumbling and pressed his attack with renewed fury, trying to end the fight before his advantage was lost. Through the chaos, Seraphina spotted Harwick slipping toward a side door. "There!" she shouted, pointing. "Harwick is escaping." Two guards broke pursuit. Thessaly was already moving, cutting off his escape route. They cornered him at a side door, his face pale but composed, his hands raised in false surrender. "My lady," he said to Thessaly, his voice smooth as oil. "Surely you understand I was merely protecting myself." Cassian forced my hand. "I had no choice but to—" "You had every choice." Thessaly's knife did not waver. "You chose to conspire with the man who tried to murder my sister. You chose to plot against the king who saved her life. Those were your choices, Lord Harwick." Seraphina reached them, flanked by her guards. 30 years, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mirella told me, 30 years of plotting against the crown. How many assassination attempts? How many loyal servants killed?" Harwick's smooth mask cracked. "You know nothing, girl." "I know you're finished." She met his eyes without flinching. "That's enough." The guards subdued Harwick, chains clamping around his wrists as he continued to promise retribution in that same measured, calculating tone. Even in defeat, he refused to break character. Even facing imprisonment, he remained the politician to the end. In the arena, Cassian's plan was in ruins, his allies captured or arrested. He fought without restraint now, beyond rules, beyond reason. He fought to kill. Alaric had taken wounds, a cut to his arm, a slash across his ribs. His pain echoed in her chest. But beneath it, his focus remained absolute. She pushed back. Not skill or strategy, but faith. Trust. The certainty that he would win because she needed him to, because their future needed him to. Alaric felt her belief. And for the first time in 12 years, someone believed in him. He disarmed Cassian with a move his weapons master had drilled into him decades ago. The golden sword clattered to the stones. "Yield," Cassian gasped. "I yield. Mercy." Alaric's blade rested against his throat. Seraphina felt the heat of his rage, the desire to end this here and now. But she also felt him pause, felt him choose. "No, you don't get the easy death." Alaric's voice carried across the silent courtyard. "You get judgment, a trial. Every noble house will know what you are. You will live with that shame until the executioner ends it properly." He sheathed his sword and walked away, leaving Cassian kneeling in the dirt. The crowd roared. That evening, in the king's chambers, Seraphina sat while Mirella checked her over. The chaos had left her shaken, but unharmed. The baby was fine. Alaric entered, his own wounds bandaged. He dismissed the servants. "You found them," he said. "You and your sister. You uncovered a conspiracy that had hidden in my court for 30 years. Thessaly did most of the work, I just listened. Watched. You did more than that." He crossed to her, tilting her chin gently to study her face. "You saw the assassin's move. You raised the alarm. You confronted Harwick when he tried to escape. We're even then." "No." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, gentle over the bruise. "We're partners." The bond hummed between them with new warmth. No longer just a lifeline, but a bridge. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "This bond, this life, any of it." "Neither do I. Perhaps we can learn together." She leaned into his touch, the first time she had allowed such closeness willingly. "I would like that." She felt his walls continuing to crumble, the ice thawing, the grief making room for something new. Outside, stars appeared over Blackthorn Castle. Inside, a bond that began as necessity was becoming something more. The trials were held within the fortnight. Cassian Ravenscar faced judgment before the assembled nobles, his crimes laid bare for all to witness. The testimony of his former servants, the letters Thessaly had gathered, the evidence of his attempted murder through rejection. He stood silent as the verdict was read, his golden beauty turned hollow, his arrogance finally broken. The executioner's blade fell 3 days later, and Seraphina felt nothing but relief. Lord Harwick's trial took longer, his conspiracy deeper and more tangled than anyone had suspected. He had been plotting against the Blackthorn line for 30 years, responsible for at least 4 assassination attempts, including the chaos that had allowed Helena's murderers to strike. When the evidence was presented, even his allies abandoned him. He was executed at dawn, his name struck from the records, his lands and titles forfeit. Tobias, the young guard who had first helped Seraphina at the gates, was promoted to the king's personal guard. "You showed compassion when others hesitated," Alaric told him. "That is the mark of true loyalty." 3 months after her arrival, the kingdom gathered for a different kind of ceremony. Seraphina stood before the great hall, no longer the dying woman who had crawled through snow to reach the king's gates. She stood tall in a gown of silver and white, her pale hair crowned with a circlet of moonflowers that Alaric had picked himself from the castle gardens. Her belly had grown round with the child that would arrive within weeks. The nobles who had whispered about her were silent now. They had watched her expose a conspiracy that had threatened the crown for decades. They had watched her face down the man who had tried to kill her. They had watched her transform from victim to survivor to partner. Today, they would watch her become queen. Alaric waited at the end of the great hall, dressed in formal black and silver, his gold eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him. His emotions washed over her like sunlight. Pride, wonder, and something that had grown stronger with every passing day. Love. Not the desperate, possessive obsession Cassian had called love. Real love. The kind that saw all her broken pieces and wanted to help her become whole. The kind that gave without demanding. The kind that healed instead of harming. She had not believed in such love before. She had not believed she deserved it. Alaric had taught her otherwise, not through grand gestures or pretty words, but through small kindnesses accumulated over weeks. The way he brought her tea when she could not sleep. The way he listened when she needed to speak about the years with Cassian. The way he never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything. The way he had learned to laugh again with her. She reached the dais where he waited, and he took her hand. The bond between them sang with warmth. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "I was ready," she said, "the moment you chose to save me." "I didn't save you." His voice was rough with emotion. "You saved yourself. You crawled through snow and death to reach my gates. You chose to accept the bond. You chose to trust me. You chose to fight beside me. Everything you have, you earned. And you? What did you earn?" He lifted her hand to his lips. "A second chance." The ceremony proceeded with ancient words and older magic. The moon goddess was invoked, her silver light seeming to fill the great hall even in the middle of the day. Oaths were spoken, promises made not just to each other but to the kingdom they would rule together. Thessaly stood witness, tears streaming down her face, watching her sister transform from victim to queen. Mirella stood beside her, the old healer's weathered face split by a rare smile. And when the crown was placed upon Seraphina's head, the hall erupted in cheers that echoed off the stone walls. The nobles who had once whispered about her now shouted her name. The guards who had watched her crawl through their gates now bowed before her. The kingdom that had been cold and uncertain now welcomed her as their queen. She was queen now. Luna of the Blackthorn pack. Partner to the man who had given her back her life. But as she turned to face the cheering crowd, her daughter kicked within her, and Seraphina knew the truth. The real gift was not the crown or the title. It was not even the love that had grown between her and Alaric, though that love was precious beyond measure. The real gift was hope. Hope that she had survived the worst and found something beautiful waiting on the other side. Hope that her daughter would grow up knowing what real love looked like. Hope that the future could be better than the past. Hope that wounds could heal, that walls could crumble, that even the most frozen heart could learn to love again. Alaric's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as they faced their kingdom. "From this day forward," she said softly, "a promise meant only for him." "From this day forward," he answered, and meant it with every piece of his heart. The labor came 2 weeks later in the deep hours of the night. Serafina had felt the first pains during the evening meal, but had said nothing, wanting to be certain before alarming anyone. By midnight there was no doubt. The contractions came in waves, each one stronger than the last, and she gripped Alaric's hand as Morella prepared the birthing chamber. Through the bond, Alaric felt her pain as his own. He stayed at her side through every contraction, his golden eyes never leaving her face, his hand steady in hers even when she squeezed hard enough to leave bruises. "I am here," he said, over and over. "I am here. You are not alone." She was not alone. She had been alone for so long, through Cassian's cruelty, through the rejection sickness, through the long walk through the snow. But she was not alone anymore. The birth was difficult, but not dangerous. Morella's experienced hands guided the process, her calm voice talking Serafina through each stage. Thessaly wiped the sweat from her brow. Alaric held her hand and let her scream into his shoulder. And then, as dawn broke pink and gold over the mountains, a new cry joined the chorus. Morella lifted the baby, checked her breathing, and placed her on Serafina's chest with a smile that crinkled her weathered face. "A girl," she said, "healthy and strong, just like her mother." Serafina looked down at her daughter, at the tiny face scrunched in protest at the indignity of being born, at the wisps of silver-pale hair that caught the morning light. The baby's eyes blinked open, unfocused but searching, and Serafina's heart seized in her chest. "She is perfect," Alaric whispered, his voice breaking. "She is absolutely perfect." "She needs a name," Thessaly said softly from the corner of the room. Serafina looked at Alaric. They had discussed names during the long months of her pregnancy, but nothing had felt right. Now, holding her daughter in her arms, surrounded by people who loved her, the name came to her like a gift, and like a question. "Helena," she said. Then, more quietly, "If that's not too painful, I know she isn't. I know her father tried to kill you both." Alaric's voice was rough. "That man has no claim on her. None." "Then Helena, for the mate you lost, the one who taught you to love the first time." She met his eyes. "This child will know what real love looks like. She will carry the name of someone who was loved well, and she will be loved well herself. That's not pain. That's healing." Alaric's eyes filled with tears. His grief and his gratitude intertwined, and she felt the weight of what this meant for him. A way to honor the past while embracing the future. "You would give her that name?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Helena Aurora Blackthorn. Helena for your past. Aurora for our future. The dawn after a very long night." Alaric leaned down and pressed a kiss to their daughter's forehead, then another to Serafina's lips. The bond between them blazed with light, with love, with the fierce protective joy of two people who had found each other against all odds. "Helena Aurora," he repeated, "Princess of Blackthorn, daughter of the strongest woman I have ever known." The baby yawned and settled against her mother's chest, content and warm and safe. Serafina laughed through her tears, exhausted and exhilarated and more alive than she had ever been. "Welcome to the world, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." In Blackthorn Castle, two wounded people had found their way to each other through darkness and death and despair. They had built something new from the ruins of what came before, not by forgetting the past but by honoring it while reaching toward the future. Not a fairy tale ending. Something better. A beginning. And somewhere in the heavens, the moon goddess smiled down on her children, on the woman who had crawled through snow to find her destiny, on the king who had opened his frozen heart to save a stranger, on the love that had grown from necessity into something real and lasting and true, on the new beginning that awaited them all.